Hi everyone, I'm Chelsea Grayson coming to you once again from the Office of the CEO. This is my series where I can help you be more successful in your career, or I can help you successfully transition to a new career. So today we're going to be talking about my top 10 tips for a successful interview. So here goes. Number one, don't just be on time, be early, be at least 5 minutes early to every interview. This is going to show your enthusiasm for the job, your attitude about timeliness, and your willingness to do more than what they've asked you to do. And almost most importantly, this will allow you time to acclimate to your surroundings, take some deep cleansing breaths, and sort of shake off any nerves that you've got. Number two, unless they've specifically asked you otherwise, you should wear proper traditional interview attire. You can't come too formal. Trust me on this one. Even if this job isn't going to require you to wear formal business attire every day, the company and the interviewers do want to see that you take this process very seriously and you understand the solemnity of the interview process. And on a more subtle and maybe even subconscious note, they want to know that without instructing you, you know what it means to appear professional. Now, I'm also happy if you DM me on the side to do specific fashion consultations for a specific interview in a particular industry with a particular company. Just DM me on the side. We just don't have time for it in today's clip. Number three, and I talked about this on the previous episode, I cannot overemphasize the importance of a strong, full handshake at the beginning of every meeting, and an interview is no different from any other meeting. This is going to set the tone for the whole meeting. It's going to establish how much respect they give you and how much validity they accord to everything that you're going to say in that interview. Number four, they're definitely going to ask you to tell them about you, right? And you can assume, and unfortunately this is true, that they either haven't read your resume or that they've just sort of glanced at it briefly just before you walked in the door. So you've got to perfect your elevator pitch. Hopefully everybody knows what the elevator pitch is at this point. This is your career in a nutshell, and I do mean a nutshell. This is 30 seconds to 1 minute long, i.e. the time it takes for an elevator ride. So for example, mine might be, well, I currently sit on boards professionally. Before that, I was the CEO of True Religion at American Apparel. And before that, I was a partner in the Mergers and Acquisitions Group at Jones Day. And just before that, I clerked for a federal bankruptcy judge. So guys, my career is decades long. So if yours is any shorter than that, then your elevator pitch should be even shorter than that. The cool thing about an elevator pitch is that it's such a high-level description that it gives them a chance, if they want to flesh out details and ask you all sorts of questions. And now you're in conversation mode with them, and now things are much more relaxed. You probably won't be as nervous in that mode, and they're going to start to feel comfortable with you, and that's what you want, because now they're going to start to think about you as a colleague, not an interviewee. So number five, never look down at your resume or at any notes that you've brought. If you can be held responsible in this life for knowing one thing cold, it's facts about you, right? And the more that you make eye contact with them, and the more that you have that relaxed conversational style that we just talked about, the more trustworthy you'll be, and the more comfortable you're going to appear in your surroundings. And that's very important, again, on sort of a subconscious level, because if you appear comfortable in your surroundings, that means you feel comfortable working there. You feel comfortable filling this vacancy. And that's definitely going to come across to the interviewer. Number six, and I hope this goes without saying, research the living bejesus out of the company that you're interviewing with. And also, if you possibly can, all of the folks that you know that you're going to be interviewing with. So you can interview people and companies just by simple Google, right? I mean, you can find stuff on LinkedIn for sure, but there's also public filings, there's social media postings, there's all sorts of news that's going to appear on the news tab in a Google search, and you need to look for all of that, because as organically as possible, you're going to want to raise some relevant fact at some point in conversation with this interviewer. I'm going to give you a very quick anecdote about this. So I was interviewing with a hedge fund manager years and years and years ago on something that I ultimately did get. And I had done some really deep Googling on this guy and found out that he had at one point been a competitive fencer. And my son also competitively fences. So at some point when the interview was winding down, I happened to mention to him that, I saw that you fence competitively and my son does as well. And it prolonged the interview for another good 10 or 15 minutes, which is great because you always want the interview to run long. And it certainly made him remember me in the end. And I know this because he gave me feedback later on after I got this gig. And so that was just a very organic way of bringing something really interesting up in the interview that made it, again, much more conversational between us and less like he's just sort of asking me all of the same questions that he's asked all of the other interviewees. So number 7, and this sort of dovetails onto that point, you need to come prepared with questions that you're going to ask the interviewer. It is never okay to say, well, I've had all of my questions answered by the research that I've done, or the last person answered all of my questions. Even if it's the exact same questions, it shouldn't be, because you should have enough that you don't have to recycle. Always ask at least 2 or 3 questions. And the research that you did is going to lead to some of these questions, right? Because hopefully it brought up some recent item that was in the news, something you're confused about the future strategy of the company, something where you see that they're trying to grow in a particular area and you want to ask about that question. All of those things are fair game. The things I would not ask on an interview, and I would hold off until I actually had the offer to ask these sorts of questions, are things about vacation policy, even corporate culture, kind of casual Friday, that kind of stuff. I hate to say it, but that really will make you come off as sort of a troublemaker or somebody who's more interested in the perks or, sort of how to relax on the job versus somebody who's really coming in to be a hard charger and roll up your sleeves and work in the trenches. Pro tip, people, if you're searching for questions to ask, people love to talk about themselves. Certainly more than they want to talk about the company. I mean, people do love to talk about the company where they work, but they love to talk about themselves, even if they're not going to readily admit that. So if you just start asking people, how long have you been at this company? And what positions did you have at this company before you got to your current position? And oh my gosh, that's really impressive. How did you work your way up like that? And what's your next goal at this company? And are we going to be working together? And if not, how can I make it so that we can work together? Because I really feel like we're resonating with each other. People will love to tell you about their paths, and they will walk away from that interview feeling really warm and fuzzy, even if they're not really certain why they're feeling that way. Number 8, they'll always ask you something like, what are your strengths and what's your biggest weakness? Trust me when I tell you, you should never answer the weakness question honestly. They don't really want to hear about your weaknesses, and whatever flaws you tell them about, they're just going to kind of walk away and remember those flaws, and they're going to write it down as a reason not to recommend you for that position. But you have to answer the question, right? So it's sort of a catch-22. So always make sure that you bring up a quote-unquote flaw or weakness that's really kind of a humble brag about something, or that shows a learning experience or shows your ability to learn from a particular mistake or a flaw. So for example, you can come in and you can say, well, I really want to hone my public speaking capabilities a little bit. So what I've started to do is I've started to volunteer at a program at my local community college where they're doing a lecture series, and I've started to volunteer to participate in this lecture series on a weekly basis. And through that, I've really started to hone my craft, and I've become a much better public speaker. So you see what you did there, right? You've sort of answered their question because you've indicated that maybe you have a little bit of work to do in terms of public speaking capabilities, but you've also showed them that you're willing to work on a weakness, and also that you're getting much better, so that it's actually really not a weakness. It's something that you're doing on the regular. So that's how I would answer that particular question. They will always ask you that question. Number 9, listen, they have a vacancy and they need to fill it. So that means that they can't fill it until they finish this interview process, which is super laborious for a lot of people because all the people interviewing you have their own jobs that they want to be off doing, that they have to be off doing. They've got all sorts of things on their to-do list, and trust me, it's running around in the back of their brain the whole time they're talking to you. So the sooner they can finish out this process, the more they can actually get done on the job, and then they can go home, right? And they also, the fact that there's a vacancy in the office means that they're all pulling a little bit more weight probably, or they're getting ready to pull a little bit more weight than they normally do. So they all want to get this vacancy filled as quickly as possible. Make this easy for them. if you can just show that you are the right candidate to come in and start taking the load off of all of them as quickly and efficiently as possible, they will be so happy with you, because then they can go back to their normal lives and they don't have to go through this interview process anymore. So figure out what it is that will immediately take the burden off. What is going to save them some time? Is this a position where you're coming in to try to garner more revenue for the company? Is this a position where you need to come in and set some policies up so that they can do things more efficiently, so that people aren't working so hard every day? If you can hone in on whatever that is and make their jobs easier both that day during the interview process, so that you're easy to go off and recommend for this position and they can be done with it, and also long term, so that they can be assured that once you fill this vacancy, you really are going to share the load with everyone else. That's going to make everyone a lot happier when they're walking out of the room. Finally, number 10, always end with the strong handshake that you started with. Tell them thank you so much and how eagerly you want this position and that you can't wait for next steps. And then be sure, once you get home, to send a thank you email. You don't need to wait. You're never going to appear too eager. Trust me when I tell you, that thank you email is really going to help solidify whatever relationship you guys established during the interview process. It will help them remember you. They won't always respond to the email, and don't be offended or hurt if they don't, but they will see it. They will forward it along to the head of HR or whoever is running the hiring process. It will go in your file and it will be a positive note. Don't forget to send that thank you email. So that's it. That's my top 10 tips for a successful interview process. Drop some comments and let me know if you guys have any other tips, or if you disagree with any of my tips. I'd love to hear it. Make sure and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode. It's going to be a good one, and I'll see you next week with that. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.